She had always been someone who noticed small details in life. The way sunlight fell on a dusty windowsill, the quiet sound of a clock ticking in an empty room, or how a stranger's smile could change the mood of a hectic morning, so it was no surprise that she noticed him. Not because he was loud or dramatic or trying to stand out in any way. On the contrary, he was the kind of person who preferred to remain in the background, moving quietly, with a calm presence that somehow made the busy office feel a little less chaotic. She first saw him on one of those rainy Monday mornings. The kind of rain that made the streets shine like glass and made the world smell faintly of wet asphalt and freshness. She had spilled her coffee in the rush of trying to get to work on time, and she cursed under her breath, trying to mop it up with a paper towel. That was when she noticed him. He was wiping the floor with such careful attention that it almost looked like he was painting. He didn't hurry, he didn't glance at his watch, he just moved deliberately, almost as if the world around him didn't exist. She found herself watching him for a few moments, almost without realizing it. There was a kind of serenity in the way he worked, a quiet dignity that was rare to see in a world that constantly celebrated the loud and flashy. And then he looked up, and for just a second their eyes met. He smiled. Not a big grin, just a small, genuine smile that made her chest feel lighter in that odd, fluttering way that she only ever noticed when something unexpected touched her heart. She quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed her staring. The next few days she found herself seeking little reasons to cross paths with him. Sometimes it was in the elevator, sometimes at the cafeteria, sometimes just in passing on the hallway. Every time she tried to smile casually, hoping it looked natural and not like she was actively looking for him. But it was hard not to notice him. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm and confident but not arrogant, that made her feel safe, not in the sense of physical safety, but in the sense that around him, the world felt a little less stressful, a little more manageable. Her friends noticed too. They teased her endlessly about it. "Are you seriously crushing on the janitor?" they would ask, laughing, as if it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. At first she denied it, flustered, not sure how to explain that it wasn't about status or looks or anything superficial. It was about something deeper. His kindness, the way he treated everyone with respect, the way he noticed small details in the office that no one else did. Like the time he brought an extra umbrella for someone who had forgotten theirs during a sudden shower, or the way he quietly tidied the break room when everyone else had already left. She started to pay more attention, observing the little things that made him who he was, how he hummed softly to himself while working, how he always nodded when someone spoke to him, never interrupting but making people feel heard. She noticed the gentle patience in the way he helped a new employee who was struggling to understand the printer, or how he smiled at a stray cat that wandered near the building's entrance. It wasn't just admiration. It was growing curiosity, a desire to know the story behind those calm eyes and quiet demeanor. She wondered what his life was like outside the office. Did he have family, friends, hobbies, dreams? Questions like these buzzed in her mind, sometimes distracting her during meetings or making her lose focus on her own work. She realized she was thinking about him more than she wanted to admit, and yet there was no shame in it. It was just life. One afternoon, as she was leaving the office, she found herself walking behind him, noticing the way he carried the mop bucket with ease. She had no idea why, but she blurted out, "Do you ever get tired of this job?" He looked at her for a moment, eyebrows slightly raised, then chuckled softly. "Everyone gets tired sometimes," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But I like what I do. Makes me feel useful." It was such a simple answer, but it struck her in a way she didn't expect. Most people would complain, exaggerate, or dismiss the question. He just answered honestly, without pretense. She smiled, unsure why she felt a little lighter after that brief exchange. Days turned into weeks, and small interactions like this became a regular part of her routine. She would stop to ask about his day or comment on the weather, or share a small joke she had heard. He would respond in kind, sometimes with humor, sometimes with a thoughtful pause that made her feel like he was really listening. Not everyone noticed these small moments, but to her they were everything. Then came a moment she didn't expect. She had been feeling down after a particularly stressful week. Deadlines, meetings, and endless emails had drained her energy. She sat in the break room, barely paying attention to her coffee, when he quietly placed a small paper bag on the table beside her. "For you," he said simply, with that same calm smile. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a small pastry, still warm. "I thought you might like this," he said, shrugging slightly as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, almost unable to speak. He nodded and walked away, leaving her staring at the pastry, wondering why a small act of kindness could make her feel so seen, so cared for. It wasn't about romance yet. It wasn't about love. It was about connection, the kind that rarely appeared in her busy, distracted life. From that day on, she began to notice him even more. Not just in passing, but in little ways. How he always straightened chairs after a meeting. How he offered a quiet word of encouragement when someone struggled, or how he sometimes left little notes of positivity in the break room. She couldn't help but admire not just his work ethic, but his character. It was rare, and it drew her in, slowly but surely. Her friends continued to tease her, but now she didn't care. She would shrug, laugh along, but inside she knew there was something special about him. She didn't know what it was yet, and maybe that was the beauty of it. She didn't need to define it. She just wanted to understand him, to learn the world through his calm, patient eyes. And as the days went by, she realized something important. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who blend into the background, the ones whose presence is subtle but undeniable. They don't demand attention, they don't seek validation, and yet they leave a mark on everyone they encounter. And she was starting to see that mark, quietly, in ways that made her heart lighter and her days a little brighter. She didn't know what the future held, or if anything beyond friendship would ever come of it. But for now, she was content to notice him, to appreciate him, and to let the small, ordinary moments between them grow into something meaningful. She realized that sometimes life's most beautiful connections begin in the simplest ways, with a glance, a smile, or a small act of kindness that lingers long after the moment has passed. And in the quiet of that realization, she felt a strange excitement. Something was building, something gentle and steady, like a tide rising without notice. She didn't yet know where it would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to be present for it. She wanted to see where this quiet, unexpected connection might lead, even if it started as simply noticing a man who moved through the world with calm grace and a kind heart. And so, she waited, not impatiently, not with expectation, but with quiet anticipation, ready for the next moment that would remind her that ordinary life sometimes holds extraordinary surprises. She had been thinking about him constantly for weeks. The little acts of kindness, the quiet smiles, the way he seemed to notice things no one else did. It all lingered in her mind. Every time she walked through the office, she found herself hoping to see him, hoping for just a small moment of interaction. She knew it was unusual, maybe even a little impulsive, but she couldn't shake the thought that there was something special between them. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, she sat alone in her apartment staring at her phone. Messages from friends and coworkers blinked on the screen, but she ignored them. Her thoughts kept drifting back to him. What if she never took the chance? What if she waited too long and the moment slipped away forever? That thought made her heart pound in her chest. The decision came suddenly, like a spark lighting a candle. She would tell him how she felt, not in a hesitant, roundabout way, not with awkward hints or waiting for the perfect moment that might never come. She would just say it, boldly, clearly, honestly. The next morning, she arrived at work with a sense of nervous excitement. She spotted him near the elevator, mopping quietly as usual. Her heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Hey," she called softly, approaching him. He looked up and gave her his usual calm smile. That smile made her feel as if the world had slowed down for a moment and her nerves eased slightly. "Hi," he replied, nodding politely. She hesitated for a moment. The words stuck in her throat, but then she thought, now or never. I have something to ask you," she said, her voice shaking just a little. He tilted his head, curiosity in his eyes, and encouraged her with a small nod. Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air. She immediately regretted nothing and yet feared everything. The office seemed to grow quiet around them. People passing by slowed down, sensing that something unusual was happening. She saw surprise flicker in his eyes. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, didn't walk away. He just looked at her, a mixture of shock, warmth and something she couldn't quite read. For a moment she thought he might say no. She felt her stomach twist with anxiety, imagining herself walking away embarrassed and humiliated. But then he smiled. Not a big dramatic grin, but a small, calm smile that reached his eyes. "That is unexpected," he said softly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "I'm not sure what to say." Her heart raced. Not sure what to say? Was that a yes or a polite way to decline? She searched his face for clues, but all she could see was honesty. "You don't have to answer right now," she said quickly, trying to hide the nervous tremble in her voice. I wanted to be honest. I wanted you to know how I feel." He nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," he said. "It takes courage to speak like that. I need some time to think." She felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because he hadn't rejected her outright, and disappointment because she had hoped for an immediate answer. Still, she understood. This was a lot to take in. And yet something in the way he spoke, the calmness in his voice, told her that whatever happened next, it would be genuine. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment. Every time she saw him, she felt a rush of emotions: hope, fear, excitement, and an unexpected sense of connection. She realized that this was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. She wasn't just attracted to him. She felt a deep admiration, a pull toward the kind of person he was inside, not just the man she had seen cleaning floors or helping colleagues. The following days were a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She noticed him looking at her occasionally, but he never spoke about the proposal again. Instead, he continued his work with the same quiet dedication, moving through the office as if nothing had changed. And yet she could sense that something had shifted. There was a new warmth in his gaze, a gentleness in his gestures that hadn't been there before. She found herself observing him more closely than ever, noticing things she had overlooked before. The way he straightened papers on a desk he passed, the small nods of encouragement he gave to stressed employees, the way he paused to listen if someone needed to talk. Everything about him seemed to glow with authenticity, a rare kind of humanity that made her heart ache with admiration. Her friends noticed a change in her too. She was quieter, more reflective, often lost in thought. They teased her mercilessly, asking if she had fallen for the janitor yet again, but she didn't mind. Their words felt distant, irrelevant. What mattered was this connection she had discovered, the strange, unexplainable bond that had grown between them in such a short time. One afternoon, she saw him sitting quietly in the break room reading a small notebook. Curiosity got the better of her and she walked over. "What are you writing?" she asked gently, trying not to startle him. He looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled. "Just some notes," he said softly. "Thoughts, ideas. Nothing important." She sat down across from him, careful to respect his space. "Sometimes the small things are the most important," she said. He nodded, considering her words, and for a moment they simply sat there in silence, sharing the quiet without needing to fill it with conversation. That evening, as she left the office, she felt a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. She had taken the bold step of proposing, and though he hadn't given her a clear answer yet, she felt closer to him than ever. There was an honesty between them that she had never experienced before, a sense that they could be real with each other without pretenses or expectations. The next day, something unexpected happened. He approached her quietly near the elevator, his calm expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, her heart racing. They walked together to a small, quiet cafe nearby, a place she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away from the busy streets, warm and inviting, with soft music playing in the background. They sat down at a corner table, and he ordered a cup of tea while she chose coffee. For a long moment, neither spoke, just sipping their drinks and watching the world outside the window. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes serious. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About the proposal," she nodded, holding her breath. It was, surprising, but in a way it was also honest. "I appreciate that more than you know." She leaned forward slightly, anxious to hear what came next. "So?" she asked softly. He took a deep breath. "I can't give you a simple answer right now. This is a lot. But I want you to know something. I care about you more than I expected I would. And I want to be honest with you, with everything." Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. She had hoped for clarity, But she realized that this honesty, this vulnerability, was even more meaningful than a simple yes or no. It showed that he was thoughtful, that he considered her feelings, and that he respected the bond they had formed. They talked for hours that day, sharing stories of their past, their dreams, and their fears. She learned about his life in a way she never imagined, and he learned about hers. Each word, each story seemed to draw them closer, building a foundation that felt real and strong. By the time they left the cafe, she felt a sense of connection that went beyond attraction or infatuation. It was deeper, grounded in respect, understanding, and the quiet recognition of each other's humanity. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became more natural, more comfortable. They laughed together, shared small acts of kindness, and continued to support each other in ways that didn't require grand gestures. The proposal hung in the background, a bold step that had opened a door, but the focus shifted to the quiet moments, the shared smiles, the thoughtful gestures, the feeling of being seen. She realized that love, or something very close to it, didn't always come with fireworks or drama. Sometimes it grew slowly, quietly, in small moments of connection that felt ordinary but were, in truth, extraordinary. And she knew deep in her heart that whatever happened next, whatever the future held, this bond they had discovered was something rare, something worth cherishing. She hadn't expected anything like what happened next. After weeks of quiet anticipation following her bold proposal, he finally asked to meet her after work. He had chosen a small, quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place that felt private even in a busy city. The moment she entered, she noticed the soft hum of conversation, the warm glow of the lights, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. She scanned the tables and saw him already seated, calm as ever, but with something in his eyes that made her pause. There was a seriousness she hadn't seen before. She walked over and sat down across from him, her heart racing in a way it hadn't before. He smiled faintly, just enough to reassure her, but his expression remained thoughtful. He stirred his tea slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. She had no idea what was coming, but a part of her sensed that this moment could change everything. "I have something I need to tell you," he said quietly, looking her directly in the eyes. She nodded, leaning in slightly, ready for anything. "Something important about me, about my life." She felt a small chill run down her spine. She had already confessed her feelings, put herself out there in a way she had never done before. Now it was his turn to share, and the weight of the moment made her pulse quicken. "I've never talked about this before," he continued. "Most people don't know, and I have my reasons for keeping it private. But you deserve honesty. You deserve the truth." She nodded again, urging him silently to continue. He took a deep breath. "I'm not just the janitor you see every day," he said slowly, carefully. "I am a billionaire." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. What do you mean?" "I own a company," he explained, his tone calm, almost casual. "It's a large technology business, something my family built. But I don't work in the office. I don't sit in boardrooms or attend high-profile meetings. I choose to live simply, to stay out of the spotlight. And I came here to be myself, not to be judged for wealth or status." She stared at him, speechless. The world felt surreal. For weeks she had admired him for his kindness, his humility, his gentle nature, and all this time, he had been living a life completely different from what anyone would have guessed. "You mean, all this time I was talking to a billionaire?" she asked, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. He nodded, sipping his tea. "Yes, and I chose to work here in this way because I wanted real connections. I wanted to know people for who they are, not for who I am." Her mind raced. There was shock, certainly, but there was also an unexpected warmth. Everything she had felt, admiration, curiosity, attraction, suddenly made sense in a new, strange way. Yet she also felt a flicker of confusion and fear. Could she trust this? Could she believe that all the kindness, the moments they had shared, had been genuine and not influenced by who he really was? Seeing her hesitation, he reached across the table, placing a hand gently over hers. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly, "and I understand if it feels strange. But everything between us, everything I've shared with you, has been real. Not because of money, not because of status, but because I see you, truly see you." Her chest tightened. She realized that this was more than a revelation about wealth. It was a test of authenticity, of trust, of the bond they had slowly formed over weeks of small gestures and shared moments. They sat in silence for a while, letting the words settle, letting the realization sink in. She thought about all the times she had admired him, his patience, his attentiveness, his gentle nature, and now it seemed even more remarkable. He had chosen simplicity, chosen to be kind and humble despite having the power and resources to live a completely different life. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked finally, her voice quieter than she expected. "Because I wanted to know you first," he said honestly. "I wanted to be sure that you liked me for me, not for anything else. I didn't want my life, my money, or my position to change how you felt. I wanted the connection we have to be real without any complications." She felt a wave of emotion she couldn't name: relief, admiration, gratitude, and even a touch of awe. It was rare to meet someone so grounded, so self-aware, and yet so capable of extraordinary things. The quietness she had admired wasn't just humility. It was strength, choice, and integrity. For hours they talked. Not about business, not about wealth, but about life, about dreams, about the things that mattered most to them. He shared stories of how he had lived in different cities, traveled quietly, and experienced life without the constant pressure of being a public figure. She shared her struggles, her joys, and her aspirations. Every word, every pause built a bridge between them, connecting their hearts in a way that felt unshakable. At one point, she laughed at a story he told about a travel mishap. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and she realized that even though he had lived a life of immense privilege, he had a genuine sense of humor, a grounded perspective that made him relatable. It wasn't wealth that defined him. It was his choices, his values, and his quiet humanity. As the evening turned to night, they left the cafe together. The city lights reflected on the wet streets, and she felt a strange sense of clarity. All the fear she had felt, the embarrassment of her proposal, the uncertainty of his feelings, now seemed less important. What mattered was honesty, connection, and the choice they were making to understand each other deeply. Over the next few days, their relationship subtly changed. She no longer saw him only as the janitor she had admired. She saw him fully as a person with extraordinary depth and unexpected complexities, and he, in turn, began to show her parts of himself that he had kept private for years: his thoughts, his fears, and even the small vulnerabilities he rarely revealed to anyone. She noticed that despite his wealth, he still treated people the same way he always had. He held doors open, listened carefully, offered small acts of kindness without expecting recognition. The money and power he possessed didn't change him. It simply existed in the background, almost irrelevant to the person he chose to be every day. Her friends were shocked when she told them, struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet janitor with the billionaire he really was. But she didn't care about their surprise. What mattered was what she had experienced, the connection that had grown between them and the trust that now existed. She realized that sometimes life's most extraordinary surprises are hidden in the most ordinary places. One afternoon, as they walked together through a nearby park, he stopped and looked at her with seriousness. "I hope this doesn't change anything between us," he said softly. "I know this might feel overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'm still the same person you've gotten to know." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "I know," she said. "And honestly, it doesn't scare me. If anything, it makes me admire you even more. You could have chosen any life, but you chose to live honestly, to be real. That matters more to me than anything else." He smiled then, a little more freely this time, and she felt a sense of relief wash over both of them. The truth had been revealed, and yet it had not broken the bond they shared. Instead, it had strengthened it, proving that their connection was built on authenticity, respect, and a genuine understanding of each other. They continued to spend time together, growing closer, learning to navigate the new reality of their lives. She realized that love, or something very close to it, wasn't about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about honesty, respect, and the willingness to see someone fully, even when the truth was surprising or difficult to accept. After the shocking revelation about his wealth, life didn't suddenly become perfect or simple. In fact, it became even more complicated in subtle ways, the kind that crept into everyday life quietly but persistently. She noticed it first when people at work started looking at him differently. Whispers followed them when they walked together, and curious glances sometimes lingered just a little too long. She knew that for some, he was no longer just the quiet janitor. He was now someone who seemed untouchably wealthy. At first, she tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the moments they shared: quiet lunches, small walks, and late evenings talking about life. But she couldn't deny that a part of her felt exposed, like the world was suddenly watching their story unfold. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't expected. She had been confident in her feelings before, but now reality seemed heavier, more complicated. One afternoon, she decided to confront the unease that had been growing inside her. They sat on a bench in the small park near the office, the sun dipping low behind the city buildings. "Do you ever worry," she asked carefully, "that people only see you for what you have now?" He looked at her quietly, thinking. "Every day," he admitted finally. "It's hard to be sure that someone likes me for who I am, not for the life I lead or the money I have. That's why I chose to live quietly, to keep parts of my life private." She nodded slowly. "I understand, I don't want to feel like I'm being tested, or like this changes what I'm supposed to feel for you." He reached for her hand, and she felt the warmth of his palm, calm and grounding. "It doesn't change anything between us," he said, "but I know it might feel like it. I can't stop other people from judging, from being curious, from gossiping, but what I can do is be honest with you always." That honesty comforted her, but it didn't erase the tension. Life became a series of small tests, tiny moments that made her question what it meant to care for someone in his world. When they went out to lunch, a waiter would sometimes give him extra attention, or someone would whisper and point subtly. Even casual conversations with coworkers sometimes carried a weight, a knowing look, as if they were silently measuring her reaction. She struggled with the realization that the world had changed the moment his wealth became known, even though he remained the same person she had admired. The quiet strength, the humility, the small acts of kindness. These things hadn't changed, but the lens through which everyone else viewed him had. And she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt about her own place in that world. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat together in her apartment. She watched him sip tea quietly, thinking about how different their lives had been just a few weeks ago. "Do you ever regret telling me?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. He shook his head. "Never. You're worth it. You've seen me, not the facade, not the status, but me. That's all I wanted anyone to see. And you did." She felt a lump in her throat. "But what if I'm not enough? What if I'm not ready for this kind of life?" He reached across the table and gently held her hands. "You are enough. You've shown courage, honesty, and patience. Those things matter more than money or power. I don't need you to be anything other than yourself." The reassurance comforted her, yet she knew that life outside the quiet bubble of their conversations would test them in unexpected ways. People's expectations, curiosity, and assumptions had a way of creeping in, changing how they saw themselves and each other. A few days later, she noticed subtle changes at work. Colleagues were friendlier than usual, offering small favors or smiles that seemed to carry a hidden meaning. Some people whispered behind her back, questioning why she was spending time with someone of such high status. It wasn't malicious exactly, but it was a reminder that the world outside their connection didn't see things the same way they did. She confided in him during one of their evening walks. "I feel like suddenly everything is different. People are watching, judging, trying to measure me against you. And it's exhausting," he nodded, understanding. "I know. I've lived with this all my life in ways you can't imagine. But you have to remember, our connection isn't about them. It's about us. If we let others define how we feel, we'll lose sight of what really matters." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but doubts lingered. Could love survive under the weight of wealth, attention, and social expectations? Could she remain herself without being swallowed by the pressure of it all? Then came a moment that shook her in a way she hadn't expected. One morning, while she was at the office, she overheard a conversation. Two colleagues were talking quietly, but not quietly enough. "Did you hear?" One said. "The janitor? He's actually a billionaire. Can you imagine? And she's dating him? Just like that?" "I don't know if I buy it," the other replied. She felt a mixture of embarrassment, frustration, and fear. It was one thing to know the truth herself, but hearing the disbelief and judgment from others made her question whether her feelings could survive in a world that couldn't see her for who she really was. When she met him later that evening, she tried to hide her emotions, but he noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "It's nothing, people are talking. It's harder than I thought it would be." He took her hand and squeezed it reassuringly. "Let them talk. They don't define you. They don't define us. What matters is what we feel, not what others think." She wanted to believe him, and she tried, but over the next few days she found herself questioning everything. She loved the person he was, but could she navigate the world that came with him? Could she remain herself without being swallowed by the weight of expectation, judgment, and curiosity? One evening she confided in a close friend, someone she trusted completely. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. "I love him, but everything feels heavy. People are watching, judging, and I'm scared I'll lose myself in all of it." Her friend listened patiently. "It's normal to feel this way. What you're feeling isn't weakness, it's awareness. But remember, he chose honesty, he chose you. That means he values you for who you are, not for the world's perception. You have to trust that and trust yourself." She nodded slowly, feeling some of the tension ease. It was true. He had been honest, consistent, and unwavering in his care for her. That mattered more than the whispers, more than the curious glances. But it was also a reminder that love wasn't just about feelings, it was about courage. About holding on to each other in the face of doubt and societal pressures. A turning point came one weekend when he invited her to his home. Not his mansion, not some extravagant display of wealth, but a modest, beautifully designed house on the outskirts of the city. She was surprised by the simplicity, the warmth, and the lack of pretension. Every corner reflected care, thoughtfulness, and authenticity. "This is really beautiful," she said softly, taking in the cozy living room, the warm lighting, and the small garden outside. He smiled. "I like simplicity. I like real life, not the one people imagine I live. I wanted you to see this, to know that wealth doesn't define who I am. This is who I am." She felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Seeing him in this environment, stripped of expectations and assumptions, reminded her of why she had fallen for him in the first place. It wasn't about money or status, it was about the person. The quiet kindness, the humanity. They spent the weekend together, talking, laughing, and sharing moments that didn't need to be grand or impressive. She realized that love in its truest form wasn't about luxury. It was about trust, honesty, and the courage to face life together, even when the world tried to make it complicated. By the end of part 4, she felt stronger, more certain. The doubts and external pressures hadn't disappeared completely, but she had faced them, understood them, and chosen to trust herself and him. The foundation of their relationship had grown stronger, grounded in truth, patience, and the quiet, unshakable bond they had built. Time had passed since the initial shock of the revelation, and life had settled into a new rhythm. She had learned to navigate the complexities of being with someone whose life was unlike anyone else's she had ever known. The whispers, the curious glances, the small judgments, none of it had gone away entirely, but she had grown stronger, more confident in her feelings and more certain that the connection they shared was genuine. One evening, he invited her for a walk along the river. The city lights reflected off the water, creating a golden shimmer that danced with every ripple. It was quiet, almost serene, a rare moment of calm in a world that often felt chaotic. They walked side by side, comfortable in silence, letting the night wrap around them like a gentle blanket. "You know," he said after a while, "I never imagined life would lead me here. Not just to this park, not just to this quiet evening, but to you." She looked up at him, her heart catching in her throat. "You really mean that?" she asked softly. He nodded, a gentle seriousness in his eyes. "Every word. You've changed my life in ways I never expected. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are. Your honesty, your courage, your kindness, it's rare, and I'm grateful for it every day." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of joy and relief. To hear those words, to know that her feelings were not only reciprocated but deeply cherished, was more powerful than she could have imagined. As they continued walking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Her eyes widened slightly, a rush of anticipation mixed with nervousness. He stopped, turning to face her, the river light reflecting softly in his eyes. "I know we've had our challenges," he said, his voice steady but tender. "I know that the world around us can make things complicated, and I know that at times it hasn't been easy. But through it all, I've never doubted what I feel for you. You are the most important person in my life, and I want to make that official." Her hands trembled slightly as he opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. It wasn't extravagant or flashy, just beautifully crafted, symbolizing sincerity and thoughtfulness rather than wealth or status. "Will you marry me?" he asked quietly, looking at her with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. She looked at him, at the person she had come to love deeply, and at the journey they had shared, the bold proposal she had made weeks ago, the revelation of his wealth, the doubts, the whispers, and the challenges. Through it all, they had grown closer, had learned to trust each other, and had built a bond that no outside opinion could shake. "Yes," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, I will." He smiled, relief and joy mingling in his expression. He slipped the ring onto her finger and they embraced, the city and the river around them fading into the background. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Only the connection, the trust, and the love they had chosen to nurture together. Over the next few weeks, their engagement became a quiet celebration of their journey. They didn't announce it to the world immediately, choosing instead to savor the moment privately. They spent their days talking about the future, sharing dreams, and planning a life built on honesty, respect, and partnership rather than material wealth or social expectations. She learned more about him in those weeks than she ever could have imagined. Stories of his childhood, the challenges he had faced despite his family's wealth, and the moments that had shaped him into the humble, thoughtful person she loved were shared with a tenderness that left her in awe. She realized that wealth had never defined him. His character, his choices, and his heart had always been what mattered most. One afternoon, as they sat in a small cafe they both loved, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I want you to know something," he said. "I've spent so much of my life protecting myself, hiding parts of who I am. But with you, I don't have to. I can be completely honest, completely vulnerable, and I don't have to fear judgment. That's the gift you've given me." She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And you've given me the same," she said. "You've shown me that love isn't about wealth, status, or appearances. It's about trust, understanding, and being willing to see someone fully, even when it's hard, even when the world is watching." Life outside their private moments continued, of course, and they navigated it together. People were curious, sometimes judgmental, but the whispers and glances no longer carried the power they once had. They had built a foundation stronger than rumors, stronger than assumptions. Every time doubt crept in, they reminded each other of the bond that had brought them together. The honesty, the courage, and the shared understanding of who they truly were. Then came the day they decided to announce their engagement. They wanted it to be simple, authentic, and meaningful, reflecting the journey they had shared rather than the wealth or status that had surprised her at first. They invited close friends and family to a small gathering in a beautiful, quiet garden surrounded by flowers and the soft hum of nature. When they arrived, she noticed the smiles, the warmth, and the genuine happiness of the people who cared about them. There were no grand displays of wealth, no excessive decoration, just love, support, and the feeling of a community that valued sincerity over appearances. He stood beside her, holding her hand tightly. "I want to thank everyone here," he said, his voice steady and heartfelt, "for supporting us, for seeing us for who we truly are, and for celebrating this moment with us. This day isn't about wealth or status, it's about love, honesty, and the courage to be ourselves." She looked around, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been difficult at times, filled with doubt and challenge, but every obstacle had strengthened their connection. She realized that the twists and turns of their story had not only revealed unexpected truths, but had also allowed them to grow together in ways that nothing else could. After the small celebration, they walked together along the garden paths, hand in hand, feeling the cool evening air and the quiet magic of the moment. "I can't believe how far we've come," she said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. He smiled, kissing the top of her head gently. "Neither can I, and yet every step has been worth it. Every challenge, every doubt, every surprise has led us here, to a love that's real, honest, and unshakable." In the weeks that followed, they began planning their future together. It wasn't about extravagance or grandeur. It was about building a life filled with shared experiences, mutual respect, and the kind of love that could withstand the world's judgments. They talked about simple things: travel, small adventures, quiet evenings at home, and realized that those were the moments that mattered most. She often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From the moment she had proposed, never imagining the life he led, to the revelation of his wealth, to the challenges they faced from outside scrutiny, every experience had shaped their relationship. It had taught her about courage, trust, and the power of seeing someone fully without pretense. He too reflected on the journey. He had lived for years with parts of himself hidden, unsure if anyone would ever see the real him. But with her, he had found authenticity, acceptance, and a love that wasn't defined by money or social expectations. She had chosen him for who he was, not for what he had, and that had changed everything. One quiet evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from a small hill near the city, she turned to him. "I never imagined our story would be like this," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I thought love would be simpler, but I've learned that real love is never simple. It's honest, it's brave, and it's worth every challenge." He nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "Exactly. And I'm grateful every day that we found each other, that we chose each other, and that we can face life together, no matter what comes our way." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the city. In that moment, they didn't need wealth, status, or validation from anyone else. All that mattered was the bond they had built, the trust, the honesty, and the quiet, unshakable love that had carried them through every twist and turn. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, they sat together in comfortable silence, knowing that whatever challenges life might bring, they had already proven that their connection was stronger than anything else. It was a love forged not in luxury or grandeur, but in authenticity, courage, and the simple, profound act of seeing each other fully. And in that quiet moment, they understood that their story, one that had begun with a bold proposal, a surprising revelation, and countless tests of trust, was only just beginning. The journey ahead would be theirs to shape, filled with love, honesty, and the unwavering certainty that they had found something rare and true.